The opposition took the government to task today over revelations that more than $1 billion in unspent funds in Veterans Affairs have been returned to the government coffers since 2006. This, the opposition says, well, cuts to the department have led to the closure of regional Veterans Affairs offices, cuts to some veterans programs. The government says it's increased overall spending to the department since coming into office, but why wasn't this money spent? Veterans groups, including the Royal Canadian Legion, have written to the minister looking for some straight answers. Should lapsed funding for veterans programs be returned to general revenues, or should it be directed to the veterans and the department it is supposed to serve? Joining me now to talk about this, the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of International Trade, Erin O'Toole, the NDP House Leader, Peter Julian, and the Liberals Veterans Affairs critic, Frank Valeria. Mr. O'Toole, help us understand this. There's $1 billion that was earmarked for pensions and other benefits for veterans. It wasn't spent over a number of years because some veterans have passed away. But, you know, you've got veterans who have protested the closure of offices. You know the saying, benefits delayed is like benefits denied. Why wasn't that money spent on vets?
This is a good topic to discuss, Evan, because I'm hoping my friends who've been in Parliament far longer than I have will help me explain to Canadians how the main estimates and the estimates process works in government budgeting. So this lapsed funding is actually just part of the estimates process, where the government has to make an estimate of how many veterans will take advantage of programs in a given year, given how many veterans there are, and then how many will actually come through the door and access it. The critical part to remember is these benefits are basically statutory allocations, Evan, that whether there's 10 veterans that walk through the door or 10,000, if they're eligible, they will get them. And that's not discretionary. That's part of the statutory allocations that are there. So each year the department provides an estimate process where they try and say how many veterans will take advantage of the programs ranging from housing and the Veterans Independence Program through to several hundred million dedicated to retraining and education of veterans. And you always have to plan in the estimates for as many as you think will take advantage. And if they don't reach that, that's where you see the gap. But it's not money that didn't go out the door. It was planning for everyone.
I get it, but you know, the criticism is that every single program had tons of lapsed spending, not just for veterans, because your government has wanted to balance the books by 2015. And so some vets listening to the accounting lesson might say, you know, Mr. O'Toole, I appreciate the lesson on ledgers, but you closed 9 Veterans Affairs offices. That money could have been used to keep those offices open to help some veterans who are on this program, some of them in tears because they couldn't get the services. What do you say to them when you say, well, there is money there, but we just couldn't spend it?
Well, we're spending more, Evan, but we're spending it in new ways. So you talk about the 9 offices that were not being used. We've opened 17 operational stress injury clinics, and the Service Canada network of offices have the same level of administrative support that the old standalone offices use. So we're in a position where we have veterans that are now in their 20s and 30s. We also have World War II and Korean veterans in their 80s and 90s. We have to evolve services so that we serve both the young veterans and the old veterans. We're estimating more and we're spending more, but the opposition this week have been playing absolute games on it, using benefits that if they qualify, the veterans will get the benefit.
Well, do you buy, Mr. Julian, let me hear from you first. Do you buy this, that these are just basically programs no one's using?
Veterans will tell you, and at Remembrance Day I was, like most members of Parliament, with my veterans from my riding, and they are incensed at this government's callous attitude. We've seen closure of 9 Veterans Affairs offices that were supposed to provide services to veterans. We've seen cutbacks to veterans hospitals. I've experienced that in my own riding. We have seen as well that most of the disabled veterans can't even access disability benefits that they should be provided with. We've got vets that are being denied hearing aids who are deafened. It is absurd what is happening out there. It is a national shame, and it's because we have a government that loves to play these little financial games rather than providing services to veterans. And I think most Canadians are appalled by the attitude of this government.
Can you just comment on this? I'm going to read a quote from someone in the department to us. The variance between planned spending and actual spending in 13-14 is attributed to the fact that traditional veterans numbers are declining. Some of the older vets, sadly, are dying. And what do you make of that argument?
That's bureaucraties speak. It's the government trying to spin a line, but what we're seeing is that money that should have been allocated to veterans is being denied to veterans, and the veterans are suffering. I saw veterans the other day, Evan, just in front of Parliament Hill selling T-shirts to try to get enough money to provide some services for themselves. It is a national shame, and this government should be ashamed of itself and should be providing those benefits to veterans.
Okay, Mr. Valera, where are you on this?
Well, first of all, Evan, you should know that we at the Veterans Committee completed a report, and that report provided for 14 recommendations that required the government to move on veterans benefits, payment for pain and suffering, family support, PTSD counseling, and we had a unanimous report, and that was sent to the minister, and the minister promised that he would embrace that report, and not one penny, not one mention of veterans in the recent federal fall budget update, not one discussion about it whatsoever, not a cent to veterans. And this place is like a revolving door when it comes to veterans who are begging for money. They're disappointed, they're let down, they know they've been hoodwinked by this government who's decided to balance a budget on their backs. I visited one of those veterans communities where the VAC office was closed in Brandon, Manitoba. They have to travel 2 hours to get.
That's not true.
They have to travel 2 hours. Yes, it is true.
There's a joint personnel support unit at Shiloh
to get to Winnipeg,
so that's
to try
not true.
and get services. And now they're discouraged from going, and they won't even make a claim. I had to get up at the House of Commons and shame the minister into making a payment to a veteran from Charlottetown who was promised a mere $750 for
Mr. Valera
counseling,
can't hear me, guys, because he's lost his telex.
And it was denied him. And think about the ones who don't call their member of parliament to stand up and shame the minister into making payments.
Can I speak to that quickly? Because Frank is incorrect, actually. I've been to Brandon as well. The base by Brandon, CFB Shiloh, has a joint personnel support unit. So in recent years, we've allowed veterans to be served at nearby bases as well. That's in addition to the Service Canada office in Brandon, which is in the same building for basic administrative support and more detailed support on a military base.
There's a lot of details here, but on the overall question, Mr. O'Toole, the Public Service Alliance of Canada has tabled a demand for a moratorium on program and budget cuts at Veterans Affairs. I know the government says it spent more money since '06 on Veterans Affairs, but in the last number of years there has been, like in all departments, cuts so there can be a balanced books. Would you have a moratorium to make sure that you could actually meet your mandate? Because now you have veterans who say their needs aren't being met. You know these arguments. Now there's $1 billion that has gone to lapse spending. The budget of the department has been cut. And you've got veterans, you've got counselors who need for PTSD, they haven't been hired. You know all the criticisms on this. Why not then put a stop to the cuts and get some analysis on if you need that $1 billion?
Evan, I've got to correct you on a couple of things there. There have not been cuts. We're spending differently, and this lapsed funding, is not lapsed. It's a matter of the estimate versus what is spent. If you look at actual what is spent, I invite everyone to look at this. There's $30 billion been spent since we formed government. That's about almost $5 billion more than would have been spent using the same increases that the previous Liberal government was doing. Now, we're spending it different, Evan, because we do have an obligation to make sure that the needs of new veterans from Afghanistan are served, as well as the great World War II and Korean War veterans, whose average age of that cohort is 88, Evan, and that's the main reason why we're seeing a difference between the estimates and the spending.
Real quick, Mr. Julia, and then Mr. Valera.
Evan, what we're seeing is a difference between the services that should be provided to veterans and the services that are not being provided to veterans. Cuts in veterans' hospitals, in disability benefit, half of the veterans that have disabilities aren't even getting the benefit, and the ones that are getting the very lowest level possible, poverty level rates. We're seeing a whole range of services, including cuts to 1,000 support personnel that should be providing services to veterans. This is a national calamity. It's a national tragedy. The veterans are aware of it. I think the public is becoming aware of it. What this government should be doing instead of spinning is apologizing to veterans and restoring the funding.
Mr. Valera.
Hundreds of health care workers, mental health care workers, not hired at the expense of our veterans. 9 veterans' offices closed to save $5 million. They spent $4 million in the playoffs in the spring for self-promotion advertising. Self-promotion for a program that they spent $298,000 on. That was it. on career transition services. There are
because
cuts.
we
It's
don't
on the
have
backs
enough
of the
coming
veterans,
forward to take
and
advantage of the
veterans are
program.
complaining.
Part of the reason we're advertising.
They close
Veterans
the
have been
offices.
taught
They
to
can't
suck
find
it up,
out.
Evan, I'll tell you.
They don't go to
and they are
offices.
not. And when they don't, it's for a reason.
Okay. As I understand it, just on a fact check, Mr. O'Toole, I think there's $226 million cut from Veterans Affairs budget.
No,
Yes.
if you actually look at between
and you see the cuts in services
2006
across the country.
2006 to today, Evan, there's about 800,000 or 800 million more than when we formed government within the department.
I appreciate if the base. Sorry, you're right. If the baseline's 2006, there's been an increase. But since those increases in the last 3 years, you've actually cut departmental spending. That's fair to say, right?
No,
Yes.
it's not actually. If you look
Absolutely.
at the time period from when we took government, when the budget was about $2.6 or $7 billion, to where it is now, just a little shy of $4, that's incrementally led to a difference, a higher amount of spending between what the Liberals had been spending and us of about $5 billion. A total of $30 billion spent in veterans care. Most of the benefits, Evan, and why there's a difference between the estimates is because there's not as many veterans coming forward for retraining, re-education. That's the reason we're running the ads.
That's not the case
We
at
actually
all.
provide for more people coming forward to
That
take
is not
advantage
the
of these
case at all.
programs.
Evan, the veterans are livid, and it's for good reason.
That's
this
right.
spin just makes things worse.
I'm a veteran. I actually know
preparing
the
Evan
issues.
for an
Make
election
things-
next
We don't
year,
have
and they want to
hospitals
go with
like
a
Peter is
balanced
saying. It
budget
shows they
on the
don't
backs of
understand these
veterans.
issues.
All right, we're going to do a reality check later in the program on cuts or no cuts. We'll get the answer on that. Aaron O'Toole, Peter Julian, Frank Valera. Always great to have you three gentlemen on the program. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Evan.
Thank you.
Thanks, Evan.